Hello, everyone, and welcome to Psycho 105, Individual and Social Behavior. I'm your instructor, Dr. Kimberly Campbell, and in this video, I'm going to cover a bunch of useful information about this course, who I am, and what you can expect for the upcoming term. So let's start off with an introduction, because you're going to be listening to me talk for the next couple of months. So who am I, and why should you be listening to me teach you about these psychological topics? So as I mentioned, I'm Dr. Kimberly Campbell. You can call me Kimberly, you can call me Dr. Campbell. Both are perfectly acceptable. When I give an academic background like this, I always try and preface it with the reason why I'm doing it. And that's because, as an educator, I'm trying to teach how to critically evaluate information. Where is a claim coming from? Is that individual an expert in that field? So when information is coming to you, you think about where it's from and how much you trust it. So this is me giving you my background so that you know my experience, what I have expertise in, and so that maybe you understand that I am a credible source to be teaching you what's coming out of our textbook. So to begin with, I got my Bachelor of Science at Dalhousie University. And interestingly, for a psychology instructor at least, I didn't start in psychology. I technically started in their physics program, but I very quickly learned that numbers were not my forte, and I switched into biology. So I did a 5-year undergrad degree in biology, and I stuck around for a while doing research. I'll talk a little bit about what I did as an undergraduate researcher, but it was mostly related to genetics and sequencing, looking at single-celled organisms. Super thrilling stuff. After that, I actually took some time off. I worked for the federal government for a little while in Nova Scotia, and then I decided that I wanted to go back to school. And this is where I had my major career shift. So I went from working on the biology and ecology side of things to going and getting my master's and PhD in psychology, specifically looking at learning and communication in songbirds, which again, I'll give you a little more detail on as we get through this lecture too. But I kind of include that little bit of color because it helps you guys see that it isn't necessarily going to be a straight course from where you start to where you end in your academic career. So sometimes it helps to know that not all of us have a nice, clean career path. I've also started to include a little bit more information about me as a person because it's really easy to come across as just a faceless academic voice speaking at you through these videos. So a little bit about me is I'm an avid bird lover. I research birds, I have birds at home. In fact, I have 2 in the picture here, but I recently just adopted a 3rd. So I have quite a few conures at home, and you might hear them in the background in some of these videos because they're a little bit vocal, is what we'll say. Hopefully my filters do a good job with them, but if you do hear a couple of squeaks here and there, that's what's going on. More about me as a person, I absolutely love chocolate. I do photography in my free time, and I have played Pokemon since I was very, very young and continue to do so. In that ever-elusive free time I mentioned, I like to collect hobbies. So things like sewing, knitting, crochet, sculpture, painting. I like to try all of those things. I'm not necessarily great at all of them, but it's something to do. So that's just a little bit of me as a person. And actually, while I'm talking about birds that you might hear, just another cute close-up picture. This isn't just an excuse to show more cute bird pictures, but it does serve a purpose to talk about the background noise that you might hear. And if you end up coming to any of our live meetings, then you might see these guys. So just giving people a heads up in case you're not the biggest fan of birds. All right, so more about my credentials. This is going to be more about my research background as opposed to talking about my academic background, though there is quite a bit of overlap here. So as I mentioned, as an undergraduate in the bio program at Dalhousie, I was doing research in a lab that was looking at single-celled microorganisms. So I would go out and collect soil samples and extract the DNA of any microorganisms in that soil, and then I would design an I would design PCR primers to pull out genes so that we could sequence those genes and see what species we had. So I have quite a background on PCR and cloning and running gels and stuff like that, which isn't necessarily useful in my day-to-day life in psychology, but it is kind of helpful, especially if we start talking about things related to biology. For my graduate research, as I said, I took a pretty big step sideways and started studying something completely different. So I've looked at learning and communication in black-capped chickadees. And I actually like to do a small sub-lecture when we get into the chapter on learning. And I talk about using operant conditioning, which is a type of learning technique, in black-capped chickadees. So I'll give you a little bit more information about what I do then, but for the basics of it, we'll play sounds to black-capped chickadees, teach them that some sounds are good and get them food, and some sounds don't get them food. And then we'll play them new sounds and see if they treat them the same as the sounds that get them food, or if they treat them like the no food sounds. And by looking at how they react, we can figure out if these birds are putting sounds in the same category or not, which is a pretty cool way of understanding how their minds are interpreting information. But as I said, I'll give you more details on that when we actually learn about operant conditioning, because the setup makes a lot more sense with that background. And my last point for introducing myself as your instructor is to talk a little bit about my teaching philosophy. I always like to point out the fact that my slides are very boring, you might say. Plain black text on a white background. You'll find that a lot of my images are fairly high contrast, and that's actually an intentional choice. I've had some students who have visual difficulties, and textbook slides and figures from textbooks tend to be notoriously bad with contrast, so they're very hard for some students to see. And so I've gone out of my way to try and fix that, to make it accessible so everybody can see it. And on that note, if you think of any changes that I can make that would help make this easier to view, or if you think I should talk about something in class, never hesitate to let me know about that. I am always looking for a way to improve my content. More about my teaching philosophy. I always point out that online learning is very new and different. Some of us have been doing this for almost 2 years now, but maybe some people, this is their first online course. So there's a little bit of a learning curve here. And I try and introduce as much flexibility as possible into my courses so that students have that chance to get used to what's going on, how things are done, and when things are due before the term gets too far away from. So you'll find that there's a lot of flexibility coming up as we talk about things being due and when they're due and that sort of thing. So I expect that there will be a learning curve, but so should you. So if, I experience technical difficulties, that might happen. I might have to re-record a lecture here or there if something goes wrong, but for the most part, I would hope that I have it figured out by now. My last point here is that I'd like you guys to try and make use of the resources that are available. So I have weekly office hours. I will meet with you guys. I'll show you the dates on how to access that when we get over onto our EClass site, but I'll do live Zoom meetings twice a week so that we can sit down and talk face to face. If you have any questions, we can chat about it that way. If you just want to interact with other people in the class, you can do that there too. It's a really nice way that we stay connected, even though this is an online course. I also like to include lots of videos and extra links, whether that be in the slides that I'm teaching from, or if it's on our EClass site itself. I don't include these videos and extra links because I test directly from them or anything like that. I just like giving you another perspective on what we're learning. I do find that sometimes people might not quite click with the way that I explain a topic, but maybe I find a great YouTube tutorial that talks about the topic a little bit differently, and maybe that works for other people. So I like to give you as many different options as I can because I find it helps to have that information presented as many ways as possible. So if you find you're struggling with a topic, maybe check and see what extra resources I've given you, and maybe some of those will help. And if all else fails, don't be afraid to reach out to either myself or our TAs. You can make use of our general forum if you want to post a question that you think might be relevant to everyone in the class, but we're here to help you out. We're going to try and answer your questions as best we can. So don't leave things too long, because it's very easy to get overwhelmed with stuff not making sense. So if you have questions, ask. All right, so next is actually going to be the first of what are many tangents that I tend to go off on. And this is going to just be something that I find interesting and useful, but isn't actually relevant for the class. It's not something you're going to be tested on. I just found that as an undergraduate, I was never told how I should interact with other people in academia. And I found it very intimidating to try and reach out to people because they seem to have a set of rules that I didn't know about. So as soon as I started teaching, I decided that I would share those sort of hidden rules because it makes it a lot easier to reach out to people and to not feel as intimidated. So I'm just going to do a brief sidestep here, and we can talk about how do you address people in academia. So if you're sending someone an email or if you're meeting someone in person, you might wonder what title to use. Do you call them instructor, doctor, or professor? And the answer is that it's going to depend on the individual and on their background. So I'm going to tell you the rules of which ones are acceptable when. So if we start with doctor, doctor is going to be somebody who has a PhD or an MD. I mostly interact with other PhDs, so that's what I use. But MDs would also fall under the category of doctor. So as I mentioned, I have a PhD, which means that you can call me Dr. Campbell. That would be an official title that works. If somebody is a professor, that someone, almost always a doctor, has the specific job title of professor. So they were hired as a professor, and their job title is professor, usually of arts or science if you're in the psychology department. This might be a little bit different overseas. I know that professor might be more preferred, I believe, in England, but I'm not too sure of that. I'm only really familiar with North America, but professor would be the job title here. For instructor, instructor is kind of a generic term for someone who isn't a professor, but is teaching a course. So I'm teaching this course, but my job title isn't professor. I'm actually an assistant lecturer, so you could call me instructor, and that would also be okay. And I have a visual for those of you who enjoy visual interpretations. So here we have this tiny little pink dot in the middle. That's me. As I said, I could be called doctor because that's my title that I have for my degree, but my job title, you could call me instructor. I do not fall under the professor category because that isn't my job. And so if we wanted to use a different example, I always use my graduate supervisor because I can pull up his information really quickly. So we can look at Christopher Sturdy, and we have his listed degrees. So he has a Bachelor of Arts, Master of Arts, and a PhD. So because he has a PhD, we would be very confident calling him Dr. Sturdy. That would work with his titles. We can also notice that his job title is listed as a professor of science. So we could also call him Professor Sturdy and be fairly comfortable with that as well. I do like to add in the caveat here that these rules of addressing people is a good way to start. So in your first email, maybe you'll send something to me and you'll say, hey, Dr. Campbell, I have a question. And then you sign off with however you want to be addressed. And then in my response, you can actually check my sign-off. And my habit is, if you've addressed me as Dr. Campbell, my sign-off will be just my first name. And that's me giving you a subtle cue that I'm okay with you just using my first name. You could continue with Dr. Campbell if that's what you're comfortable with, but by using my sign-off, that's sort of a subtle nod to what I'm comfortable with you calling me. So, and that works outside of academia, I find as well. If somebody sends you an email, you look at their signature, what they've signed off as, and that's a great way to respond to them. So if they use their first name, then you're probably pretty safe responding with their first name in your follow-up. And that's just pretty useful to have, because sometimes I would get anxious about how to ask or how to communicate with people, how to respond to people, and that sort of thing. And that was a neat little rule that I figured out probably a lot later in my academic career than I should have. So I'm passing that knowledge along to you so that you don't have to worry about that the way that I did. All right, so our next portion is to actually get into the content of this course. So I want to introduce you to what's going to be happening in this class. For those of you who may have already taken a course at the U of A, this may be old information, stuff that you're used to. But for those who haven't taken a course online or at the U of A at all before, I'm going to go into a little bit more detail just so that you have that information so you know where to start in this class. So we're going to start with EClass, and EClass is going to be the main source of information for this course. That's going to be where you found this video. That's going to be where you can find slides. That's where the syllabus is posted, announcements. I'm even going to include frequently asked questions and the general forum where you can post your own questions and get responses. You'll also have resources for all of our course assessments. So that's where you can get access to our written assignment information when we get to that. That's also where you're going to access your midterms and final exam. I'm going to post all of my lecture videos and slides on eClass as well, so you'll have access to those in time to watch them during the class that we'd normally cover them in. And on that note about lectures, we're going with an asynchronous delivery method. I find that a lot of students have schedules that they're trying to work around. And so by pre-recording my lectures and making them available to you to watch at your leisure, that way you're not stuck to just during the class period. So the lectures are pre-recorded. I'm going to post them on YouTube and put a link on eClass so that you can click on our eClass page and it'll take you right to the video that you need. The joys of using YouTube is that you have the option to play the videos at either faster speed or slower speed. You can bring up subtitles. You can sort of pause it and come back to it. All those sort of things that you get from a normal YouTube video, you then get from the lectures, which is pretty great. I'm also going to be posting the slides on eClass as both PowerPoint and PDF files. If you need a different type of file format, just let me know, but for the most part, those two seem to be pretty ubiquitous. And I try and post the slides a little bit early, so you'll have access to the slides before I start recording, and then that way you just have a little bit of advanced warning with the slides. But everything will be posted in time to cover it during that week. And if I'm done either the slides or the lectures early, I'll always post them early. I'll just put them in the week folder for when we would be covering them. But sometimes I do get a little bit ahead with my lecture recordings, and I don't think it's a bad thing for you to have access to them early. Even though all of our lecture content is going to be pre-recorded and posted for you guys to watch, I do still want you to have that opportunity to have some interaction. So I've scheduled live meetings on Tuesdays at 5:30 p.m., basically during our normal regular scheduled class time. These are completely optional Zoom meetings, so you don't have to come, but you are more than welcome to. And the purpose here is so that you can come and ask questions, discuss course topics, or just chat about science in general. So you can find the Zoom links to these meetings on eClass under that live meetings section. As I said, attendance is not mandatory. The way that I set these up is that I plan to be there for at least 15 minutes. If we're all sitting there staring at each other and no one has questions, after 15 minutes, we can all leave. However, if you have more questions, if we're having a really good discussion, then I'll stick around. I've had some of these go as long as an hour or even an hour and a half, depending on the topic. So I just say a 15-minute minimum because I've also had sessions where no one shows up, but I do have lots of time where we can chat about stuff relevant to the class or not during that period if you have anything you'd like to discuss. For the remainder of this video, I'm going to walk us through the syllabus for this class. I'll hit the high points, the stuff that I think is most important in the syllabus. Then I'm going to hop us over into our course eClass so that you can see all of the important locations and where things are on that site. And then I'm also going to show you our Top Hat site, which is our textbook site for this course. So I'm going to do all of those starting now. So first things first, here's our course syllabus. You've probably already seen this document already, but I'm going to run through, like I said, just the high points here. So we have the course information, so me, office hours, which are our live lecture or our live Zoom meetings. We have our teaching assistants. We have David and Alexandra. We have all of the format stuff for our lectures, live meetings, evaluations, all that sort of stuff. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to scroll down to the important stuff, the things like our textbook information. I'm going to go over that when it's on our EClass page because it's the exact same information, but a little bit easier to look at. But I'm going to scroll down to some of the important stuff. So our important dates, these are the same for all of our classes. But this is what I'm looking for here. So this is our lecture schedule and our planned readings. So this schedule is going to be the most important document for this course because it lets you know what we're talking about and when. So you'll see that our first day of class is September 7th. We're going to be covering the methods chapter from the textbook, which is chapter 2. Then the next week, we're going to cover the next chapter, which is chapter 9, language and thought, and so on and so forth. So this also includes important dates like our midterms. So our first midterm, September 28th, and it's going to cover chapters 2, 9, and 10. And then after the midterm, we're going to cover things like our assignment. We're going to have then the second midterm, which is on these chapters, and then the final exam, which is tentatively December 7th. I believe because this is an evening class, we're going to be having our final exam in our last class period, but I'll be making an announcement about that as we get closer to the date. So this is a great document to have access to. For me, I print this off for every one of my courses just so that I can track what we're doing and when. But what you guys are probably most interested in is our breakdown of assessments. So as you saw, we're going to have 2 midterms. Each of those midterms is worth 20%. The first is September 28th, second is November 2nd. We're also going to have a final exam, which is worth that 30%. I'm going to talk about those first because I've already mentioned them. So if we scroll down here to our midterms and then final exam, so the midterms are going to be 60 minutes long. I'm not going to make you write for the whole class period. I just think that's cruel. So we're going to do 60 minutes. It's going to be a mixture of multiple choice and short answer questions. And the midterms are not cumulative, which basically means that I'm only going to test you on the material that we've covered that hasn't yet been tested for the midterms. The final exam is going to be cumulative, but it's going to be more heavily based on the things that I haven't tested you on yet. So basically about 70% of the final exam will be on the last 3, I think it's 3, yeah, the last 3 chapters that we cover, that's going to be on the final exam, about 70% of it, and then the other 30% or so will be questions related to the chapters that had already been tested on the first 2 midterms. I like asking questions that kind of make you connect concepts between chapters for the final exam, just to show that you're thinking about things. But again, I'll give you lots more information about what kinds of questions I ask and things like that as we get closer to those assessments. For both the midterms and the final exam, they're going to be written on EClass, and they're going to be written during the scheduled class time, so starting at 5:30, and so the midterms are an hour long, so 5:30 to 6:30. The final exam will be 2 hours long, so 5:30 to 7:30. Both of these, or I guess all 3 of these, are meant to be open book exams. So you're able to use your notes, your textbook, whatever resources you have available to you. I just ask that you work independently so you're not working with anyone else, but you're able to look at your notes and look things up during the exam. Just keep in mind your time, and again, I'll give you all these warnings as we get closer to those assessments. So if we scroll back up, we are also going to have a written assignment. It's going to be worth 10% of your grade, but I'm not going to tell you too much about it right now because getting started in this course, you've already got enough on your plates. What I typically do with my written assignment is that I'll introduce it right after our first midterm. So I set it up so that it's going to be introduced after our first midterm. So at the end of September, I will introduce that written assignment. And then you have until sort of mid to late November. November 23rd is when it's due. But I do find that if I don't tell you anything about it, people tend to get a little bit nervous. So what I will say is that this assignment is basically going to have you read and critically think about a scientific research article. And I typically keep it fairly short. Think 2 pages, double spaced, as sort of the maximum length. It's just meant for you to show that you have some critical thinking and ability to evaluate what you've read. So as I said, I'll give more details as we get closer to that being relevant. So I'll introduce it after the first midterm and then give you all the specifics then. Our last component the last component that I'm in charge of is going to be our homework assignments. So there are going to be 9 of these, basically 1 per chapter. And these are going to be done through our textbook site. So these are done through Top. So these homework assignments consist of multiple choice questions based on your textbook readings. So I encourage you to do the homework assignments as we work through the topics in lecture, but I don't make them due until the exam that's testing those topics. So basically, our first 3 chapters, the homework assignments aren't due until the first midterm date. So chapters 2, 9, and 10 are going to be due on the 28th. So the same day as our midterm at the end of the day there. So if you wanted to, you can use these as review when you're practicing for the midterm, or you can work on them as we work through the topics in lecture. That's entirely up to you. I just wanted to give you some flexibility there. And then the same thing, so our next 3 chapters, 4, 13, and 12, because everything's all out of order, those are going to be due on November 2nd, which is the date of our second midterm. So you can choose when you're going to do these, and you can work through them all at once, or you can come back to them as long as you don't submit them. But while we're on the topic of this, I am actually going to hop very quickly over and show you what Top Hat looks like. All right, so this is Top Hat. So this is our interactive textbook for this course. So on the side here, you should see something fairly similar to this when you log in. I don't have any way of showing a student view, but my understanding is that you should see something fairly similar to this. And so at the side, you can click on sort of, welcome to this textbook. Here are the author biographies. Here's a little bit of information about me, and then our general table of contents. But that's all just sort of basic information to get you started. What you're going to really care about are each of our modules. So each module is a different chapter that we're going to cover. So module 2 is chapter 2. And so within each module, you're going to see 4 different things. First, you're going to see the slides for that course. That's just going to be the same, or the slides for that module, which are just going to be the same as what's up on EClass. You're also going to see a glossary, which is just the important terms from that topic. You're also going to find the reading. It's labeled as an assignment, but you'll notice it's just labeled as review, which means that you have access to it, and I'm advising that you take a look at it, but it's not 4 marks. So for each of these chapters, there's lots of really great visuals, interactive figures and such, videos. And then the kind of cool part here, which are all these different questions that you can work through as you do the readings. And some of these have no right or wrong answer. They're just meant to get you thinking. But some of them are actually going to be basically practice questions for you as you work through the text. So I recommend reading through this along with our lectures so that you have a complete view of the information that you're going to need for this course. The other important part that you're probably really wanting to see is the homework assignment. So these are the 9 homework assignments that are for the course, 1 for each chapter. They're going to show up the deadline here, so due September 28th at midnight. That's what we just talked about in the syllabus. And then you'll find that these are just questions that are based on the readings that you've done in the chapter. So multiple choice questions, and these are the questions here. So they'll load as you scroll down, and then you can just save and submit at the end. I don't have that option because I'm not a student, but that's what the homework assignments look like. I've hopped back into the syllabus here and scrolled up just a little bit into the online homework disclaimer area. I just wanted to draw your attention to the fact that if you don't want to use Top Hat for homework, if you don't want to use that textbook, I do also have an alternative no-cost task to get the corresponding grades, just so that you don't have to go through Top Hat. There is a written assignment that you can do as an alternative. So if you're going to opt out of using our website, then contact me in advance of the ad drop deadline so that we can make alternate arrangements. All right, and then the last part of the syllabus here that I wanted to draw your attention to is actually this research participation component. So when I was talking about our homework assignments before, I said it was the last component that I'm in charge of, and that's because research participation is actually run centrally for the department. So all students in 104 and 105 are going to be doing research participation all through a central system. And if I hop on over to EClass, I can show you where all the documentation is for that and all of the videos walking you through it. So here is the course EClass. If you are watching this video, then you have found this page more than likely. So this is just mostly the same information that you found in the syllabus. This is also where you can find the syllabus. We have announcements here as well. So that's just going to be general announcements for the course. If I'm sending out reminders about upcoming exams or anything like that, they'll come through the announcements. You will also get an email at your U of A email address with that announcement content in it, so you don't have to manually check the announcements, but those are there. There's also a general forum here for students to use. So this is a great spot for general inquiries if you'd like to have, or if you'd like to ask a question that maybe would be useful for other students to know the answer. That's the best spot to post it. You can subscribe to that forum if you want to receive notifications when people post there. But myself and the TAs will be monitoring that to give responses. Here's also a quick link to that Top Hat site for our course. So that's all the stuff at the top. But I came here initially to show you guys what was I showing you? Research participation, that's what it is. All right, so this tab here is all collapsed down. It's going to show all the information for research participation. And so this is maintained by our research participation coordinator, Dr. Carleen Lynch. So Carleen does an awesome job with research participation. She has listed all of the information that you need to figure out what's going on with research participation. There's handouts, videos, and frequently asked questions. So I would recommend taking some time and going through all of this before you sort of start worrying about it, because I believe she's done a fantastic job showing this to you. I do want to draw your attention to the fact that research participation does not start until Monday, September 13th. So you have lots of time to familiarize yourself with this information. And then if you do have questions after going through this, Carleen's information is at the top here. So I would contact her with anything to do with research participation, just because I don't actually have access to that system. So I'm not very familiar with how it works. All right. So for the other information here on our EClass that you've probably already figured out, we have our Getting Started in this course, which is where you can see our slides for the stuff I started off with. This is our live meeting, so this is where our Zoom links are. There's also some etiquette guidelines here, but basically most of it is just saying, be polite, be respectful, don't do anything bad. I've pasted a lot of the information that was in our syllabus, just that I figure you might want to access regularly, things like our email policy. So if you have any personal inquiries, you can email me directly. Please make sure that you include our course code in the subject line, because I am teaching multiple classes and I want to know which class you're asking about. Please don't expect an immediate response on weekends. I try and stick to responding sort of 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, though I will sometimes make exceptions, especially if there's an emergency. For general inquiries, as I said, try and use that general forum here on EClass, because that way you have both myself and the TAs responding to questions, and other students might know the answer, so they might respond as well. When you are emailing either myself or the TAs with a question, especially about content, try and include extra information. So don't just ask, hey, what does this topic mean? Or what is this thing? Instead, tell me, this is the part that I understand about this concept. And I know this is how it works here, but this is where I'm having trouble. Maybe you don't know how to apply it to a situation, or maybe you're not quite making connections or something like that. So if you can tell me which part is confusing, I can usually give you a much more detailed response, and it'll be much more useful. So just keep that in mind if you're sending emails. So I'll close those back up. This is the textbook information again. So this is everything that was in the syllabus. We have links here. They are clickable. So if you want to go to the bookstore links, this is the U of A bookstore. You can also go through Top Hat directly. You can register as a student. You can go directly to our course if you already have an account. For this stuff, it is fairly straightforward. You just click on these links and walk through it. It won't let me click on them now because I already have an account and I'm already set up. There is also going to be an option for a free trial. If you're not sure that you want to use the textbook, then you can try it out for 2 weeks. So you can go through those links there. If you're having any issues with Top Hat, they have a really great support team. So there's a bunch of different ways you can contact them. They have an email address, they have a phone number, and then there's a sort of help button on all of their web pages and within their app if you use that. So that's that information there. I will be posting practice examinations as we get closer to our exams. This is also where you're going to be able to access our exams when it is time to write those. And so all of the information is in here. And I guess, yeah, so the last thing to show you would be what everything is going to be posted as for the rest of the semester. I think I mentioned already I'm going to be posting slides in PDF and PowerPoint. So you can find those here, and I'll post these in advance, and then I'll post the video links here as well so that you can click through to watch those on YouTube when they're ready. Hopefully this walkthrough gives you a little bit of an idea as to where to find information and what to expect for the rest of the course. If you have any questions, you can come into one of our live Zoom meetings and ask. You can post on the forum and ask, or you can send an email to either myself or the TAs. But I look forward to working with you guys this semester, and potentially I will see you in one of our live meetings.